How's it going, Eliminators? Today we're going to be working on a Bombardier DS90 two-stroke kids ATV. So let's get right into it. This video is going to be just about how to find parts for a certain machine if those parts are discontinued from the manufacturer. So Bombardier, they're owned by Can-Am, and Can-Am discontinues their parts after about a decade. So after 10 years, you can't get factory parts anymore. And if an aftermarket manufacturer stops producing aftermarket parts for that specific machine, you're kind of screwed. Now, the reason I'm mentioning that is because right here I have a float, and this float goes inside of that carburetor. The problem is this float has a small hairline crack in it. So what happens is when the carburetor is sitting like this on the machine, this float doesn't float because it fills with fuel. So when the fuel comes in and fills the sediment bowl there, instead of bringing the float up and closing that needle valve, this float remains heavy and it drops down and keeps that needle valve open. So my customer here was complaining that this carburetor always leaked ever since he bought it, and this is the reason. Now, I have purchased a carburetor kit here. It's a Kimpex 209-114 carburetor rebuild kit. You can see two-stroke DS90, and these normally go for like 50 or more. It has just about everything you would need to do a rebuild. All your jets, all your new screws, your seat and your new needle valve with a rubber tip on it, a couple gaskets, but you can notice there is no float, so I'm gonna have to order a float. So the video that just shows you how much fuel can actually get inside of one of these things, it's pretty crazy, and essentially this thing was junk. Now sometimes you can fix them using epoxy or some kind of seal-all, but sometimes that doesn't work, and you have to be careful because these floats are designed to float, so they're supposed to be a certain weight, and if you make them any heavier, they might not work the same. I ended up getting a part number for this float here. It doesn't really matter because that part number is discontinued. So essentially, I had to find an aftermarket alternative. Unfortunately, the aftermarket parts were also discontinued. So I was essentially left with an ATV that was rendered useless because you can't get parts for it anymore. And if I can't get a float, then the carburetor doesn't work. Now, this is a Mikuni carburetor. So this is like OEM, you guys can see there, Mikuni Corp. That's an OEM carburetor, and to get that carburetor, it's like $200-300, completely out of the question for what my customer wanted. So you could go with an aftermarket carburetor from China. You can get it on eBay or Amazon. It might cost you anywhere from 40 to maybe 50 bucks, and your results may vary. They are built essentially out of cheaper materials, so you're gonna get what you pay for. And I don't recommend getting a China carb for a performance application. On something like a push lawnmower or a riding lawnmower, sure, I use aftermarket carbs all the time from China, and normally you don't have any problems. So I had to do some searching, and the searching led me to this float here. Now I'm going to be putting some pictures on screen to show you the difference between this black float and the beige one over there. There's a slight difference in the metal tang that comes off of the black float, whereas on the beige float it's all plastic. And also the little tang that holds the needle valve, that is going the opposite direction. However, everything else is identical. All of the dimensions are the same, and these things line up perfectly. Even the little 45-degree groove on the plastic float itself, that's going to be the same as well. Now you might be wondering, how hard could it have been to find that part to replace it? And this little guy right here, it was pretty hard to find. So essentially what I ended up finding out was that this type of engine, this is a Bombardier 90cc two-stroke, and this carburetor here is used on different manufacturers' engines. So I was able to find this float on a part number under a Polaris 90cc engine. So essentially what I did was I went and found the 2004 Polaris 90cc, which is the equivalent of this Bombardier 90cc, because this is also a 2004. And then I opened up the parts diagram for that, the float for the Polaris 90, ran the same carburetor. So then I kind of crossed my fingers and ran the Polaris float part number, and sure enough, it came as not discontinued and I could order it. And unfortunately, it was like 65 bucks, but there's really not much I could do other than run a China carb or pay like $300 something for a replacement OEM carb, which again, my customer really didn't want to do. So you guys can see here, we have $65.52, And this is your part number right here. It's an 0450976. The tangs that hold the needle valve, you guys can just see they're going an opposite direction, but that's really no big deal. You know, for something like that, this will fit. It drops in perfectly. Like I said, this isn't really a video on how to do carb rebuild on this. It was just kind of me documenting the process because I was lucky that I was able to get this. So I'm going to start throwing this back together and see if we can get this thing running. Now, before I end this video, I have to give a shout out to 90GT Vert here on YouTube, and I'll link his channel at the end. He's the one that actually suggested I look under the Polaris brand to find that float in the first place. And it's funny because in the video that I found that he had made, he wasn't working on an ATV, he was actually working on a Chinese two-stroke scooter that just happened to use the same engine and the same carburetor. So as I stated previously in the video, it's yet another case of another manufacturer using, you know, the same engine and the same carb on a different application. And like I said, he had made a video on how to adjust the jetting on one of those carburetors. So when I was Googling information for this engine, his video popped up and I was able to get the parts that I needed. So as always, I give credit where credit is due. But if you guys enjoyed the video, think about leaving me a thumbs up. You know, it really helps me out. You can click here to subscribe, and you can click over here to watch one of my previous videos. I upload every single week, so be sure to come on back next week, check the channel out for new content, and as always guys, thanks for watching.